Hi, and welcome to the Anti-Waffle podcast of Em and Pixie.
Woohoo!
And together we'll try to talk about research without any gobbledygook. Each episode we'll be talking to a researcher who will discuss the work they're doing, looking at why this research is important and asking how did they get into this field. We hope that it will be informative and interesting and bring a bit of the academic world into the real world. Today we have two academics talking to us. We've got Dr. Lena Ciric, who is a senior lecturer at UCL in the Department of Civil, Environmental and Geomatic Engineering in the Faculty of Engineering Science. And we've got Dr. Tse-Hui Teh, who is a lecturer at UCL at the Bartlett School of Planning in the Faculty of Built Environment. Thank you so much for being here today. It's lovely to talk to you. So do you want to start by telling us about your research?
Yeah, of course. I mean, maybe I'll start if that's all right. I think the stuff that we want to talk about today is the research that we've done together. But I guess we both have another life, and especially now towards, as this project has wound down, we both do quite different things, but it definitely made sense to come together on this sort of set of sort of a series of projects, I guess. So I'm a microbiologist. I'm an environmental microbiologist. So I'm sort of interested in microbial communities that lurk in the places where we live and spend our time. And also how people relate to, whether these bugs are scary or not, and should we be getting rid of all of them, or, and I mean, within the context of the toilet, the thought of reusing your waste as a fertilizer for food has generally been somewhat off-putting for people. But yeah, I don't want to go into too much detail on that. Hui, I guess, do you want to talk a little bit about your specific stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, my research in like the broadest possible way is about finding ways to make the way we use water sustainable. And so our project together, Lena and I, was coming together around a vacuum flush composting toilet. So obviously, with a vacuum flush, it only used 200 milliliters of water per flush rather than the 3 or 6 liter flush that you get with, a modern dual flush toilet. So significantly less, which of course, when we're using potable water, which is drinking water, to flush our waste around, this makes great sense, right? To use so much less water. And then, of course, it's got the composting part, which means that rather than our waste polluting all of our water sources and our water bodies, causing fish to die because of eutrophication, which basically means all the oxygen gets sucked out of the water, so the fish have nothing left to breathe. It means that we get to reuse our waste in a sustainable way. So as Lena was talking about, it means that we can use it as compost on food, improving soil structure. Those microbes are really important for getting the nutrients into food. And all of those things made good sense to try and do this experiment of a vacuum flush composting toilet at Spitalfields City Farm, where they also, they have farm animals. They also do permaculture with vegetable growing. So the whole thing was a really nice way of trying to engage different communities into new ways of looking at sanitation, and by that way also improving their water sustainability.
Right, so that's really interesting. So just a couple of questions to make sure I've got it clear. So with the vacuum toilet, it was a case of that the waste would be, so it was twofold. One fold was that it would save water, and then the other side was that the waste would be used for fertilizer. The human waste would be used for fertilizer.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was it's like the two things, because that's one of the weird things about our flush toilet, isn't it? We use good quality drinkable water to move waste around, and we ultimately put that waste and all of its nutrients, which should go back onto the land and into our food, into a nutrient cycle. Instead, we flush it out to sea or into a river, which overloads the river, too full of nutrients. Microbes start to grow, algae starts to grow, and we actually end up polluting our water, and in a way we end up polluting our own water sources, because at some point some of those rivers get abstracted again to turn that into drinking water. So we're in this very unsustainable loop.
Well, it seems totally ridiculous to me that, we go through this massive, challenging process to clean our water so we can drink it, and then we contaminate it with our own waste and flush it down the toilet and out into rivers and seas, which we then have to, just
then clean
it seems
again.
totally ridiculous. But I think I'd like to mention from the point of view of the waste itself. So yeah, of course, much less water, but within our urine and our feces are, yes, there are some horrible microbes microbes that we're all afraid of, but I mean, they're not, on the whole, if you're healthy, they're not particularly dangerous microbes. And what else is present in there is lots of organic matter, which is, really wonderful for soil structure, and then nitrates and phosphates, which are great for growing plants. So it just, that it makes no sense that we flush away nutrients that could help, with the plant growing, and contaminate drinking quality water at the same time. But clearly, there's a lot more to it than just, this makes sense to just do it like this. There's also what people think and worry about.
Yeah, that's it's strange, isn't it? Because we know that we use animals' waste to fertilize our food. So why do we struggle as humans? Why do we struggle with using our own waste to fertilize our food?
Yeah. And I remember when I first started teaching about wastewater treatment, actually we use a lot of our own waste. So the sort of byproducts of wastewater treatment, you end up with sludge, which is basically treated human waste and other stuff. So, everything that goes down your sewer pipe, including human waste, but also, I guess, detergents, hair, whatever else people end up flushing or putting down sinks, all of that ends up in a sort of sludge cake, and more often than not, that's then spread on fields. But it's just that it's not massively publicized, so people don't even know, and then are not disgusted as a result.
If we were to go back to the beginning, how did you two start to work together on this project, on this research?
I think it was, we started working together on a slightly different toilet project through one of the, and it was as a result of some funding through UCL Grand Challenges. And then we moved on to the vacuum flush toilet in a more sort of focused way, I guess, and on a more long-term way. But how we initially got together to put in that application, I think we just sort of knew each other from the sustainable sanitation grapevine at UCL.
No, it wasn't that, Lena.
Oh,
I met you at the Bloomsbury Festival. And
yes,
there was a toilet there, remember? And it was all around public.
That's when I was pregnant.
That is right. That's why I am like so shocked that Luca is now 8. Because when I first met Luca, it was not too far away. Like I think he was about 2.5 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
And we were taking him around to allotments because because I put together the application for the Grand Challenges looking at the allotment toilets, because obviously there they often don't have flush toilets because there's no running water, so there's no flush facilities. So a lot of different allotments already have non-flushable facilities, so composting toilets in general, and there's a lot of different types of composting toilets. So then I asked Lena to join me on this particular project because the allotmenteers had a lot of, I guess, fears around the reuse of the compost that they were making from their own waste, because there's a lot of books out there, there's a lot of theories, but there's no one really there to test it. So Lena, being a microbiologist, I was like, well, can you help with this? And she could. So we got together first on those projects on the allotments. So I particularly was looking at this sort of ideas of how people's habits and perceptions change with the different types of technology that they use. So obviously a composting toilet is quite a different technology from their flush toilet at home. So what were the feelings about that? And then Lena could actually like verify whether or not their composted waste was safe or not to use, because a lot of them actually were storing the waste, like storing the compost rather than using the compost. And because of the fear.
Yeah, I remember one of the allotments had like a series of bins hidden in the bushes that had been there for years. Well, some of them maybe for 3 years and some of them for a year or so. Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. And actually, I remember, now that you remind me why, I remember the fears weren't just about microbiological content of the waste as well. There were fears about pharmaceuticals that might be in people's waste, and hormone therapy that might be in there, and even I don't want the waste of somebody with this sort of diet on my plants and stuff like that. So, I mean, I think to some extent all of these are, in fact, to a large extent, all of these are very valid, and it's sort of difficult. It's difficult without, people going, I did number 2 on this date, and last week I was on these antibiotics, or I take HRT or whatever. You're never really going to be able to screen for all of the plethora of possible sort of chemical compounds that might be in there. Same for microbes. Ultimately, we can't screen for everything, but we can get an idea of, this doesn't have as many of the fresh poo microbes now, so it's probably safe to use.
But then all of those things that you just listed that people would say that they have concerns about, they're all in animals as well. We still worry about what the animals have been fed and what the animals have been injected with, and what fertilizer, or what spray and what chemical fertilizers they've been using on plants. As everything was exactly the same. And that leads me on to my other question. So what this is going to be weird. I don't know how to say this nicely. What format is it used in? Is it like just used literally as it comes out, so it shall be sort of like spread, or is it like manipulated into something else?
I guess, Marva, it depends on whether you're talking about wastewater treatment plant, which was what Lena was talking about before, or whether you're talking about the composted waste from allotments.
So like with the toilet, with the vacuum toilet,
vacuum flush one.
Yeah, the vacuum flush one. How is that? What's the product? how natural is the product?
Yeah. I mean, the product, you don't use the product immediately. It sits in tanks for a period of time, and there's some evaporation of fluids and a bit of mixing up, and you chuck some stuff in to sort of encourage the composting process. So by the time it comes out, it's pretty sort of soily with some bits of toilet paper in it.
Hilarious. So I can't see why. No, I do see why, because my immediate reaction was, my own things, but and I just want it to go and then go away. But once it looks like, because animal manure looks like soil once they start using it. So doesn't smell like soil, but it doesn't look like it. So it's like it's weird how our minds work. So as part of the research process, were you researching, or did the research include ways of how do we sell this?
Yeah, I think that was a big part of it, and I mean, I guess Hui did more of the active research in this area, supported by, you know, the data that we had from, you know, what is actually in this final product that looks soily with some toilet paper in.
So I think the thing to realize is that actually most of the nutrients from us is actually contained in the urine, not in your poo. So because it's the pee that is the stuff that has all of the nutrients in it, and pee, unless you have a urine infection, is sterile when it comes out. So in actual fact, all of us could be peeing and then topping up that pee with water, so kind of diluting it, and then we could already be using that as fertilizer. It just doesn't give you the soil structure the way that your poo gives you soil structure once it's composted. So that's the big difference. So in terms of nutrient content, we could already be doing that. And I guess the interesting thing about working with the allotment tiers was that because there has been this long history of not having flush sanitation, and also because prior to the last sort of 10 to 15 years, allotments were mostly being run and used and all the rest of that by men. And so actually, in terms of the allotment itself, they didn't really require so many toilet facilities because they were already using their buckets, their pails, their gardening, and also reusing. They probably won't tell you this except anonymously, but they were probably reusing their pee anyway. You know, I don't know about in London, but in Australia, definitely peeing on your lemon tree, it's a very normal thing to do. So I guess from that point of view, the reuse of waste was more acceptable because of this different sort of culture. But what happened was, like, in the last 10 to 15 years, a lot more women and a lot more children started to become involved in the allotments. And that change in culture kind of started meaning that, like, well, it's not easy to pee into a bucket with like lots of kids running around. And like also like the kids were starting to do their stuff kind of everywhere in an uncontrolled way. And, you know, kids need to do more than just pee as well, right? They have poos at unexpected moments, and like no one wants to find a random poo somewhere on the allotment. So they were like, oh, now we need to have a toilet facility to do this. And I guess because of this long-standing like sort of culture, it was also seen as being slightly more acceptable to reuse the composted waste, you know, on the allotments. Though that said, a lot of people were like, oh, we will use it for decorative plants rather than for food. So there was a lot of that, like the differentiation of that as well. So it's kind of a really, interesting thing. And I've got completely off topic and I've forgotten your question.
No, you haven't. Let me just add quickly as well. I remember one of the allotments, they had been the allotment that was the most like streamlined and had been doing the composting for a little while. They were really good with using all of their stuff. So they even had like a specifically just for urine bucket with tube and a thing. And then they had the toilets themselves and they used them yearly in the orchard. So, you know, I think people are more comfortable with chucking human waste on the ground around the base of a tree where the fruits are at the top, whereas maybe they wouldn't want to grow potatoes in the waste.
Yeah. They won't be picking any mushrooms around that area either.
No. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the way the question was about acceptability, which is exactly what you covered, actually. But then I think once we dealt, the allotment project then led on to the vacuum flush toilet project. And that was almost like the next level up. So we went away from the allotments. We found a home for the compost flush toilet. I don't know if that's the right order. In Spitalfield City Farm. And then, you know, in a way, it was a sort of halfway, or maybe the next step up. So people that visited the farm, you know, clearly were interested in agriculture and so on, and probably be a little bit more open to recycling waste. And the farm itself had a huge compost heap of its own. In fact, it was more like a compost system. So, you know, they were totally on top of, you know, this, we have this pile and then this pile, and then we turn it and so, you know, we had a plan with them about how the waste from the toilet would fit into that whole system, and they were using the waste of their animals within their compost too. So it felt like a natural next step. But I think the research within the farm, a lot of that was actually about, not necessarily about, well, no, sorry, let me backtrack a little bit. Some of the first bits of research that we did at the farm were to do with how to make the loo informative and attractive to the general public. And we spent, I mean, Hui can talk a little bit more about this. We spent a good few months running workshops with different types of people. And then that ended up in a beautiful sort of mural and space where the compost toilet went in. But then we did also continue, once the toilet was in and it was being used, we continued doing some specific experiments to see what was in the waste and, you know, how long it took to compost and what nutrient levels were and so on.
So in terms of the farm, so this is the interesting thing about the farm was one of the reasons why they were interested in this vacuum flush composting toilet is that they already had a terrible toilet culture. So they had flushing toilets, but because of the varied numbers of people using the toilets and very, very small Victorian pipes, the toilets were constantly getting blocked up. So even though they had these flush toilets, people were flushing all sorts of things down there. The complaints seem to mostly come from the women's toilets, to be honest. I mean, I think they're mixed gendered, but like all of the things that get flushed down there were mostly things that women flush down. So it was like, you know, sanitary napkins and the tampons, and occasionally a nappy would, a nappy would try and get down there, stuff like that. So so by putting in this toilet and also having these big discussions around the toilets, they were hoping to sort of shift that culture of trying to flush all sorts down there, because obviously with a vacuum flush, really you can only flush paper down there. Nothing else is going to fit. And also it shoots out and it goes into 2 compost bins, which sit in the space. So, I mean, you could go around there and open it up and like, whoa, that's what I just did. If you wanted, that was a possibility. So we ran, I think there was 4 workshops in the end that we ran, and we ran it with like the polar extremes of the types of people that come and visit the farm. So one was like all the primary school students. So they have like farm hour like during a lunchtime where the kids come in and do stuff on the farm. There was also corporate responsibility people. So people coming, sort of down the road from the City of London, bankers come in and do some stuff. And also there was also the group of Bangladeshi gardeners, because Spitalfield City Farm sits right like 2 blocks away from Brick Lane. So there's a huge Bangladeshi community, and they do amazing, like grow these enormous like sort of gourds and all of these other things to eat. And they're a big user. And of course they are very concerned about the compost that they were using. So talking to them about that. And then also high school students. So actually we had 2 different types of high school students. One were the UFOs, so urban farming opportunities, which were very engaged individuals who were totally, I guess, educated around sustainability and really interested in sort of farming and farming practices of different sorts and interacting with the animals. And then another group of high school students who were excluded students. They were also a very interesting bunch, but they were surprisingly the ones who were more shocked. Well, they expressed their shock a lot more around the toilet. So trying to get these different people and trying to talk about the different motivations about why you would want to change your flush toilet habits and what would be the results of that. What are the uses of the water and the compost and the nutrients? And so that was really interesting. And that really helped inform what kind of information needed to be put on the walls to help people understand why we're using this sort of new type of technology.
Yeah, those workshops were really, really interesting, and talking to all of the different groups, that it revealed things that we hadn't even considered. And, we'd been working on similar projects for a while already. So, but yeah, there were things that we totally didn't expect, but really useful. And then that went into designing the mural. And we had the artist who did do the design and executed the painting within the toilet cubicle. She attended, I think, pretty much all of the workshops, so that she was there, she heard everything that everyone was saying, and was a sort of, in a way, I mean, it was Hui mostly that ran the workshops, and I helped out a bit, but Jenny, the artist, was sort of a bit of an observer, and I think that was really useful for her as well, to then think about what it is, that how might this look, and how do we make it accessible for all ages and many cultures and so on.
And she was the one who came up with the idea of using the farm animals to tell the story as well, which was a really nice way of linking it back to the farm and also what people really love about the farm.
Love it. No, it's really interesting. So so can you give an example of some of the things that that people were saying, or the feedback people gave that that was unexpected?
I'm trying to remember. I think
I've gone through 2 lockdowns since then, so yeah.
Yeah, I think the primary school kids were pretty open to it, really. It was the excluded secondary school students, they were totally not into the idea. The city bankers were all right, were pretty engaged with it, weren't they? The Bangladeshi gardeners were, I think that they from talking to them, there were culturally based concerns that I certainly hadn't considered before. Some of them, religion based and so on. And it was,
like eating beef or something like that.
Well, yeah. And like, is it halal? How, and if not, how can it be, yeah, it's I hadn't even really thought about any of that. So I guess that's what you get when if it's a public, if you have a compost toilet at home, I guess that's probably more palatable for most people because, it's your own family and I don't know, I guess it's easier to stomach. But if it's a public loo, I guess in an allotment, in a way, it's like an allotment family. So it's not totally public loo, but at the farm it is. And, if you have specific requirements for the fertilizer that you're willing to use, then there's no control at all about who's doing what in there.
It's a very good point.
Yeah.
I think the other thing we didn't realize was about the flush. So the definitely the corporate social responsibility people, they were the ones who were like, 200 mils versus 3 or 6 liters. Oh, I had no idea about that. And I guess that wasn't something that we had thought of as being, to actually inform people about as part of like the mural. We were thinking all about like the water cycle and the nutrient cycle, and that those things were super important. Whereas we didn't think, just the practical things like, it only uses 200 milliliters of water.
Yeah.
Which
yeah,
should
and
have been obvious, but it wasn't.
Yeah. And the engaged teenagers picked up on that as well, because I remember one of them talked about saving the dolphins.
As we should. Yeah.
Yes.
I know. I was just wondering what dolphins she was thinking of saving in London, but anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
But it was like that whole global connection, which is really nice. That what you do here actually does help save, other creatures elsewhere as well.
Yeah, a connected world.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes to our detriment, like in the last 2 years.
Yes. Don't be so connected, please.
Yeah.
Can say, well, I guess that comes back to like some of our talk about nutrients and pollutants and things like that, because actually all of those things are just in the environment now. So it's not just like coming out of our pee and poo. And the only reason why it comes out of our pee and poo is because like we're taking it in from everywhere around us.
No, that's right. Some of my other research is looking at antibiotic resistance and bacteria that are resistant to various antibiotics and the genes that they have within them that allow them to have this resistance. And these genes, the genes and the bacteria are pretty much everywhere because, as you say, Marva, we give our agricultural animals a lot of antibiotics. It's not particularly well regulated, and I think especially over the last couple of years with COVID, a lot more antibiotics have been prescribed to those that have had COVID-19 to prevent a secondary infection with a bacterial pathogen. So I think pretty much all of the hospitalized patients will have received quite long doses, appropriate doses of antibiotics, but that's a lot more than what we normally do on a normal year. So yeah, it's all everywhere. There's no escape. Yay.
Vaccine by default, yeah.
Do you want to update us about where the project is now?
Well, over COVID, people stopped using the toilet, which is not good for a composting toilet. Yes. I mean, it's like anything. Once you stop using it, it kind of goes through some sort of breakdown. So it ended up, I think, only staff using it, but also because it wasn't being used so often, and I'm not sure if it's about that or not, but definitely in London we have hard water, so there was a limescale build-up problem as well, which meant that the vacuum couldn't work as well as it should because it needs to like have a complete seal. But of course, with limescale, things become jaggedy and it can't seal properly. So because it couldn't seal properly, it can't make the vacuum properly, so then it can't flush properly. So we had a few problems there. And So now the toilet has moved. It's moved to Wiltshire, and it's going to be a much more private setup. Like, so it won't be open to the public. It'll be used by people who work within that within an anaerobic digester startup. And they also run training sessions. So anybody who does training up there will also be able to use the toilet, and it's on a mobile device. So it will be, it will now be hooked up to an anaerobic digester, not just to the composting. And it will then be, form part of a sort of a nutrient and energy cycle. So they'll be able to, heat water from the biogas that comes out of the anaerobic digester and things like that. And use
I'm sorry, what's an aerobic digester?
An anaerobic digester is a way of treating organic waste which doesn't use oxygen. So that's why it's anaerobic. So aerobic would be using oxygen to help break down the waste. Anaerobic means that you have no oxygen and it uses microbes to break down the waste, like different types of microbes.
So it's there are sort of specialized microbes that most microbes do need oxygen, but there's some specialized ones that don't, and they're the ones that are used in anaerobic digestion. So they basically break down all of the gubbins and then produce some methane gas that can be used for energy production, but also what comes out the other end that is not gas can be used as a sort of liquid fertilizer. So it's a nice home and a fitting home for the compost loo.
Excellent.
That sounds really good. Is there plans to do these sort of toilets anywhere else, or to take this project further?
There aren't any specific plans at the moment. I think we'll have to see how the touring compost loo and anaerobic digester, how that starts working and where it goes and stuff, and see if we can continue some of the bits of research. I think in many ways, from my side of the research, which is analyzing the waste that comes out, it's sort of simple. It's a simpler thing to do because you just get somebody to send you a sample and you can process it in the lab. But the other side, Tse-Hui's side, which is a lot more to do with acceptance and integration of novel technologies, is a bit more difficult if it's a traveling system, because you'd probably have to travel with it, and that's probably not what she wants.
No, well, I think it's going to be sitting in Wiltshire for a while. I don't know how much it's going to travel around. So yes, I will be following up with more interviews around the toilet and seeing how that goes over time. But other than that, we don't have any big toilet plans. So at the moment, I'm working on a project around the Wealdstone Brook, which has a water quality problem. And I'm not sure how much toilet waste contributes to this water quality problem, but an ideal solution would be like everybody has composting toilets rather than a flush toilet.
Yes.
So just like in their homes, so like every household, it becomes the norm that every toilet is a composting toilet.
Yeah, well, you could do. So I was going to say, well, that's the interesting thing about now this toilet also being paired with an anaerobic digester, because you need kind of, in a way, both types of toilets, because composting toilets give you great soil structure, but an anaerobic digester does mean that the waste gets broken down more quickly. So the composting takes a long time to develop that soil, whereas like with the anaerobic digester, it's a very fast process, and you do get natural gas out of it, which you don't get out of a composting situation. You do get gases, but it's impossible to kind of capture. And besides that, I think you get, Lena, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I was under the impression you get CO2 from it, from the composting
you
process.
definitely will do. Yeah.
So actually within a neighborhood, it is good to have I guess a combination of maybe some toilets go to an anaerobic digester and some might be composting, in order to sort of capture both sides. And it will kind of depend on the situation. So in a city, you would think an anaerobic digester would be better because, we have like more compact systems and there's more space pressures. But in a place like, where you had like more gardens or urban farming, you could have then more compost toilets where you'd have more space to turn the manure, like in the city farm. And then you could get soil structure because, you need that sort of combination of the two in order to get good nutrient and soils out of it.
Yeah, there's quite a, I wouldn't say it's not a big market, but there is a market in composting toilets, and there are quite a few different designs. Some of them, the vacuum flush toilet that we were working with is quite a bulky thing, and it has these big tanks and so on. And I think ultimately it'd be quite difficult to retrofit into, your house. But there are others which basically, are only a little bit bigger than a normal flush toilet. That you could use. And I guess waste-wise, like it's a little bit like the green bins that we have, in inner city wise, you probably won't have a compost heap because you haven't got the space for it. So then anaerobic digestion makes sense. Whereas when there's a bit more space, if you've got a garden, you may well have a compost box or something and you can chuck your waste in there.
I think the thing to realize also is that, like, as a family, you are actually producing that stuff. So I think even in terms of the Spitalfield City Farm, they barely got any compost out of that toilet, despite it being a public toilet.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think because one of the major processes of composting is the drying out and the removal of water, then most of the volume, most of the volume goes and you're left with just the dried matter.
I like that.
Oh, thank you so much for talking to us. It's been great having you here today. And thank you to everybody for listening. We'll put up links on our Twitter account, which is at Anti-Waffle Pod. Please do get in touch as we'd love to hear from you. Bye.
Bye.